I'd like to, in my concluding segment, talk about what is it that makes entrepreneurs distinctive or unique. Now, some of you are probably entrepreneurs, and many of you are probably not. Most people aren't. They're professionals, or they work in some salaried field. They're paid by the hour or by weekly or monthly, but they don't live the entrepreneur's life. Of course, raising the question of what is that entrepreneur's life? What makes it different? Many years ago, when I was at the Hoover Institution, the director of Hoover, well-known economist named John Razon, a really nice guy, kind of a roly-poly guy. John Razon and I were flying in a private helicopter, not ours, of course. It belonged to a wealthy entrepreneur. We were flying across the San Francisco Bay to this entrepreneur's estate. I was basically there because I was giving a little talk. I think I had a new book out around then. And I remember John Razon leaning over to me and saying, we were talking about the entrepreneur whose home we were going to visit, obviously a kind of a palatial home in, I believe, Marin County. And John Razon said to me, I bet I can do what that guy does. And I remember that kind of struck me because I can see why Razon was thinking that. Razon was an economist, so he was familiar with the world of business. In fact, in other words, this wasn't some like sociologist or professor of Romance languages, I think I can run Amazon. No, this was a guy who actually had credentials in the economic field. And yet, that question kind of nagged at me. Of course, I didn't say anything at the time. I just sort of nodded. But I was thinking to myself, can he? I mean, is it really the case that an academic who deals with economics could do what an entrepreneur does? And I think as I think about it, I realize that probably, and I only say probably because you never know, the answer to that is no. He could not have done what that guy did. I know in my own case, I've become something of an entrepreneur, but only in later life. For most of my life, I was, kind of a salaried guy. I worked at the Heritage Foundation for their magazine. I then went to work for the Reagan White House. I was in think tanks, the American Enterprise Institute, the Hoover Institution. Now, there was a small entrepreneurial element in what I did, and what I mean is I would get a salary for working at a think tank, and that was kind of my base salary. That's kind of how I paid the mortgage and paid for the car. And then I would do speaking, and I'd get paid for that, and I would write books periodically, and I would obviously receive royalties for that. But by and large, I had a sort of predictable flow of income that came from these sources. There was nothing particularly entrepreneurial about it until I got almost accidentally into the movie business. And then once I started doing that, I realized that, wow, this now involves a whole different game. I now have to be involved in a wide assortment of decisions. Well, think about it. How do you make a movie? Well, the first thing you do is you have to have the idea for it. That part was familiar to me. That's in a sense no different than writing a book. You have the idea. But the next thing is you got to go get money. You need investors. That's an entrepreneurial function. In fact, most entrepreneurs don't use their own money. Steve Jobs didn't fund Apple on his own. He went to venture capital firms. He got investors. Then you have to do legal work to set up your enterprise. Then you have to assemble a team. Then you have to make the movie. That involves cinematographers, gaffers, all kinds of people. Then you have to get distribution. So you have to negotiate with companies, Lionsgate and so on. And finally, you have to market the film. Now you can kind of see here when you lay all this out why it's pretty hard to make a movie. It's pretty hard to make a movie because people who generally have one or two of those skills don't have all of them. Generally, people who have money or access to money aren't all that creative and they don't know how to make a movie. You have creative people who are pretty good at making movies, but they don't know how to bankroll them and they have no idea how to market them. So this is the kind of complexity that I was, as I say, it wasn't that I set out and said, I'm going to become an entrepreneur. It's like I kind of signed on to do the movie and then I realized, oh, wait, where's the money? Oh, wait, what do we do next? So piece by piece, I sort of began to learn my way. And this now brings me to the book I wanted to talk about. It's this book right here. Not a very well-known book, but to me, a very fascinating one. It's written by a famous economist, Joseph Schumpeter, who is known for other things. Schumpeter is known for his idea of creative destruction. But this book, The Entrepreneur, to me is a kind of little-known classic. Now, why? It's a little-known classic because it talks about the entrepreneur in action. It describes what the entrepreneur does, and it distinguishes what entrepreneurs do from what other people do. It makes all kinds of trenchant and valuable observations, and I now realize I'm probably just going to introduce the book today, and then I'll go into it in a little more depth tomorrow. Notice, if you think about it, that we have powerful figures who make the case for capitalism. I think here, for example, of Adam Smith. I think also more recently of someone like Ayn Rand. But while Adam Smith talks about the sort of macroeconomic effect of what entrepreneurs do. He talks about the invisible hand of competition. He talks about mercantilism and free trade. He looks at history and discusses the Corn Laws. But if you look at Adam Smith and say, well, can you describe in the Wealth of Nations who entrepreneurs are? What kind of people are they? How do they spend their day? What makes them different? Adam Smith doesn't really go into that. Now, Rand goes into that a little bit more, but really her focus is on the clash between the sort of titanic entrepreneurial builder and then this left-wing fake altruist, the progressive, if you will, who is cunningly trying to leech off the entrepreneur, denounce the entrepreneur while slipping a hand into the entrepreneur's back pocket. And Rand is very effective in doing this. But to me, Schumpeter is in a class of his own in simply observing. And Schumpeter himself is not an entrepreneur. I mean, here's a guy who was an emigre from Europe to America. He became a Harvard professor. But what I like about Schumpeter is he wasn't just a theoretical guy. He wasn't just making, if you will, the microeconomic or macroeconomic case for capitalism. He actually said, look, let me closely observe the entrepreneur and think about what kind of person becomes an entrepreneur. How do entrepreneurs view themselves, and how do entrepreneurs carry out activities that make them different from the run of the mill? I'll simply introduce the topic by saying that Schumpeter describes the entrepreneur as, quote, a man of action. A man of action. I think what he means by this is that most people are not people of action. Now, obviously, everyone is acting and doing things, so that's not what he means. But what he means is that most people in the world follow a predictable, conventional, and a safe path. They travel, if you will, a certain road. And here we come to the key observation of Schumpeter, is he says that the entrepreneur doesn't travel the road, he makes the road. And so that's what he means by a man of action. A man of action is someone who looks at a situation and starts off by saying, oh, you know, the world as it is not the way it ought to be. I can see a way in which the world should be different than it is. And I'm going to play a role. In fact, I have an idea of how I can move the world from the way it is closer to the way it should be. And the guy who thinks like that and then makes it happen, that is the entrepreneur.